Okay, so uh, dear all, thank you very much for your attending the ENSP webinar, which is a part of the ENSP conference. Unfortunately, we are doing it now online because of the COVID-19 situation in the world. And thank you for our respected speakers who give us some of their valuable times. Before we start, I just want to mention a couple of moments that we need to respect through during the webinar. First thing is that all questions or comments will be answered or mentioned after the end of all presentations. You can raise your hand or submit it on the chat box. So I see there's a new people, maybe they are not very familiar with the ENSP. ENSP is an international organization based in Brussels, active for over than 20 years in the field of tobacco control, with more than 60 full members, including national coalitions present in 34 European countries, 20 European Union and 14 non-EU members. ENSP's mission is to develop a strategy for coordinated action among organizations active in tobacco control in Europe by sharing information and experience and through coordinated activities and joint projects. So the topic for today's is the illicit tobacco trade. As we all know, the illicit trade of tobacco products is an ongoing criminal phenomenon in the world, affecting all countries, while main forms of tobacco fraud are unchanged. Nowadays, there is a strong shift toward illegal manufacturing of cigarettes within the EU and the smuggling of illicit wines through the eastern borders. The illicit tobacco makes cigarettes cheaper or more accessible, resulting in more people smoking, which in turn has negative health consequences and associated higher healthcare costs. The illicit trade also has implication of tax policies. Not only does it deprive governments of tax revenues, it also undermines the public health role of tobacco taxation aimed at curbing smoking. During the fifth session of Conference of the Parties, the FCTC, tobacco by decision of the Conference of the Party of 12 November 2012, the protocol to eliminate all types of tobacco illicit trade was adopted, and it was negotiated by the parties to WHO FCTC over several years and entered into force 25th of September 2018. The first meeting of the parties to the protocol was celebrated in Geneva from 8th to 10th of October 2018, right after the COP conference. Now there is 54 signatories and parties to the protocol 62. The new treaty aims to eliminating all forms of illicit trade in tobacco products. It provides tools for preventing illicit trade by securing the supply chain, including by establishing an international tracking and tracing system. Countries or most of the countries are submitting their reports on SDG on regular basis. Some of them, they don't mention tobacco control or FCTC in their these reports, but as our today's topic on illicit tobacco trade, I would like to mention here that illicit tobacco trade threatens achievement of 4 of the SDGs. SDG 3, good health and well-being, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, and SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institution, and the last one, SDG 17, partnership for the goals. So the high tobacco prices reduce smoking prevalence. Illicit tobacco undermines the price was as I mentioned just now, particularly among youth, and keeps smokers detected. Furthermore, tobacco companies have a history of smuggling, and the United Kingdom anti-tobacco smuggling strategy was launched in 2000. A sub-national plan led by Fresh organization was launched in 2009. So Ms. Catherine Taylor will speak about a strategic framework for reducing demand for and supply of illicit tobacco within border tobacco control programs. Ms. Catherine is the head of tobacco regulation at Fresh Smoke Free Northeast, as Master of Science on Public Health and Health Service Research grade, passed with a merit, and Bachelor of Arts in Politics. So I would like to ask Ms. Catherine to start the presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. So I'm here on behalf of my colleagues in Fresh, which is the North East of England Tobacco Control Programme, to talk to you about our strategic framework for reducing both the demand for and the supply of illicit tobacco within that broader tobacco control context. So this is a strategic framework that's based on evidence internationally, nationally, and within our own region. And it's a framework that's available for organisations and other partners to adopt and to implement. So why are we addressing illicit tobacco? Well, many of the reasons have already been outlined. Price is the most effective policy in reducing smoking prevalence and in addressing health inequalities. We know that young people in particular are price sensitive, so this is about preventing youth uptake as well. The fact that illicit tobacco is available, it undermines other tobacco control laws, not only taxation, but age of sale laws and measures around packaging as well. So the key issues really for us is that illicit tobacco, it enables young people to access tobacco products. It keeps smokers hooked when otherwise price would be an incentive for them to quit. It perpetuates those health inequalities because of its low prices. And we know that it's linked to organised crime as well. And as has been mentioned also, the tobacco industry does have a well-documented history of involvement in illicit tobacco. They've been involved in tobacco smuggling themselves. They are not part of the solution to the problem, whatever image they like to portray. And really, illicit tobacco needs to be addressed within that broader context of tobacco control. It can't be dealt with in isolation, and nor should it be the only thing that tobacco control colleagues focus on. It needs to be placed within that broader context of protecting people from harm. So I'm here obviously to talk about work in the northeast of England, but really importantly, it is placed in that international context. So we've talked already about the WHO FCTC and also the protocol to eliminate the illicit trade in tobacco products. And the framework that I'm talking about is very much based in that international context. So nationally, illicit tobacco is an issue for our government as well. It's a strategic priority within our current tobacco control plan, and that's the document that's highlighted in green at the top of the screen. And the broader context that we're working in nationally around tobacco control is that we have a commitment from our government to go smoke-free in England by 2030. And that means in practice that we need to get smoking rates down among all population groups to 5% or less by 2030. Where we're at currently is smoking rates in England are around 14%. So looking at illicit tobacco in the UK, there has been a significant decline since 2000. So the UK government launched its first anti-smuggling strategy back in 2000 when illicit cigarettes made up around 20% of the market, illicit hand-rolling tobacco made up around 60% of the market. The UK strategy has been refreshed various times since 2000, and it has made a significant impact. And latest figures suggest that it's now around half of the levels that it used to be, at around 8% for illicit cigarettes and 33% for hand-rolling tobacco. And I've highlighted there the document, which is the UK government strategy around this. So turning now then to the northeast of England. So this is a map obviously of the UK plus the Republic of Ireland, and our region is highlighted there in yellow. So our population is around 2.6 million. We're one of the most deprived regions in England. And as expected with deprivation, historically, we have had high rates of smoking, particularly amongst routine and manual workers. And that's obviously a population group where we need to target our efforts as well. There has, however, been a significant shift in social norms around tobacco in the northeast of England. And since 2005, our collaborative tobacco control programme, FRESH, has been in place. It was introduced as a result of having high rates of smoking in England, and actually rates have reduced further and faster than any other area of the country over the last 15 years. And I'll outline what those rates are later. So tobacco control itself, it's obviously a significant priority for partners in the northeast of England. This is a chart which outlines the 8 strands of our FRESH tobacco control programme. It's based on the international evidence base around helping smokers to stop, preventing young people from starting to smoke, and protecting people from tobacco-related harm. So the programme itself is commissioned by local government public health departments in the region. And it was established, as I said, in response to having the highest rates in England back in 2005, when it was 29%. And the smoking rate now is closer to 15%. And our vision really is to keep this progress and this momentum going, and really to go further and faster than we have done previously, and to achieve the vision that we've signed up as a region of achieving 5% by 2025. And here is where our work around illicit tobacco fits within that 8-strand approach. So we've had around 13 years now of working on illicit tobacco in the northeast and with partners across the north of England. So back in 2007, we held a world first summit between health and enforcement partners. Out of that, a strategic action plan was launched with key funding from our Department of Health. That was launched in 2009. Now, elements of that strategic plan have been sustained in the northeast, but without that level of national funding. It's centred also around 8 objectives, which I'll talk through, but key activity includes engagement with our key local enforcement teams, who we refer to as trading standards. We regularly track the illicit tobacco market and public opinion around the issue, and we've done that every other year since 2009. We hold regular qualitative research with both the public and stakeholders, and using that insight, we've developed social marketing campaigns to reduce demand and to shift comfort levels with the illicit trade, but also importantly to generate intelligence for those enforcement partners. And importantly, nationally, we lead the illicit tobacco partnership with national health and enforcement partners such as our Department of Health, our Revenue and Customs departments, and our National Trading Standards colleagues too. So this is the framework. As I say, it's set in that international context. It has 8 objectives framed within broader tobacco control. It's a framework that can be adopted and implemented by other organisations. And the 8 objectives are around developing partnerships with key people who have got a role to play in this. It's about engaging frontline workers who are often the eyes and ears and the contact with smokers. It's around gathering and developing intelligence on the issue and then delivering the necessary enforcement. Importantly, it's around delivering marketing communications both to the public and to stakeholders. It's around working with retailers and businesses, obviously those who are selling tobacco. Objective 7 is around protecting policies from the tobacco industry, and obviously this is very much in line with Article 5.3. And then importantly, it's around assessing progress. How are we doing? Is it having an impact? So just to talk through some of those objectives, and the first one I've highlighted is around communications to reduce demand for illicit tobacco. So this has been a particularly significant level of activity in the northeast. It raises awareness of the links with illicit tobacco and the fact that children can get hold of it cheaply and easily, and the fact that it's linked to organised crime. So this here is our Keep It Out campaign, which was first launched as a campaign back in 2010 and has evolved since in response to insight. So the primary aim really is to reduce comfort levels with illicit. It's to shift social norms around the issue, but also it's about giving the public a channel to report intelligence if they know where it's being sold in their area. So the campaign is supported by a website at keepitout.co.uk. We have radio advertising, we have online advertising. We also have printed materials for both the public and for stakeholders. There's a new film on our Keep It Out website, which is really good, which shows the reality of the illicit tobacco trade. And we have been commissioned by areas outside of the northeast to help them run those campaigns in this area. And that's an opportunity that we'd be happy to discuss. And obviously outside of campaign activity, public relations is really key. And we have produced a guide which is freely available as well to encourage people to achieve media coverage, but also really importantly to make sure that it's evidence-based and on message as well. And we have a link to that at the end of the presentation. So linked very much to the Keep It Out campaign, another objective is around gathering and developing that intelligence. So on the Keep It Out website, we have a reporting form for people to go in and report anonymously where they know it's being sold in their areas. We also have a telephone number, which is less well used, but it provides that channel for those who don't have access to the internet. And actually, since this has been in place in 2017, we've had over 6,000 and counting intelligence reports across the UK since 2017. That information gets sent directly to enforcement partners to take the appropriate action. And then an example of this is around delivering enforcement. So we work really closely with our local authority enforcement partners, and credit for this slide goes to Durham County Council, who, along with our other local authority partners, take an intelligence-led approach to enforcement. And here are some images just to kind of illustrate that activity. So we have a premises here, a shop which has been closed as a result of repeated illicit tobacco sales. We have a picture there of the seized product. But also, really importantly, we have coverage there which not only encourages reporting, but also hopefully acts as a deterrent to others who are involved in the illicit supply trade. So turning to another objective around protecting policies from the industry, obviously it's really important that the tobacco industry doesn't have a role to play in any of our strategies. The Tobacco Tactics website is a fantastic resource for information around why this is particularly relevant for tobacco smuggling. We've actually put some guidance together with a range of organisations purely for enforcement colleagues on how they can carry out their work without interference from the tobacco industry. And that again is freely available online, and we have links at the end of the slide for that. So the final objective is around assessing progress, and this is how we know where our work is having an impact. There's various ways in which we measure this activity, but one of the key ways, which I mentioned earlier, is our survey to track the illicit tobacco trade and public opinion towards it. So every other year we commission this survey. We have done since 2009. So it estimates the size of the market and provides indications on buyer behaviour. So the last survey was conducted in 2019. We had a sample then of around 1,700 members of the public. So that included non-smokers, smokers, illicit tobacco buyers, and a small subsample of young people as well. And this graph here shows that since 2009, we've seen the proportion of smokers who buy illicit tobacco reduce from 23% in 2009 down to 16% in 2019, which means that fewer people are buying illicit tobacco. And looking at the overall size of the market in the northeast of England, so that has reduced from 15% in 2009 down to 10% in 2019, with a couple of blips along the way, but it's heading in the right direction. And we're actually about to commission the 7th wave of the survey to take place in 2021. And it'll be really interesting to see the results of that, particularly in light of everything else that is going on right now. So just to kind of conclude and to make some recommendations, so running through all of this is the fact that price is the most important tobacco control intervention, and the fact that illicit tobacco undermines these price-based policies. It's a global issue. It needs to be addressed as part of broader tobacco control programs and on as big a footprint as possible and with as many partners as possible. So we have here then a framework which is based on 8 objectives developed in line with the evidence and ensuring compliance with 5.3 at the same time. It's available on our illicit tobacco website, the link is there, along with the media coverage guide and also guidance on Article 5.3 for enforcement partners. As I've said, we have worked with others on helping them to deliver Keep It Out campaigns and also other illicit tobacco activity, and I've included contact details there for any more information. I've also included some useful links there. So we have the Fresh website for those who are interested, as well as the Keep It Out campaign website. Illicit Tobacco is our partnership website, and also Tobacco Tactics, which I mentioned, which is a really, really useful resource around tobacco industry activity. So that's my final slide, and thank you for your attention, and look forward to the questions towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Just this question related, not as a question, but from Prof. Bertrand, about what is the definition of smokers rate in the UK presentation, daily smokers or daily and occasional smoker, just to be clear now before the end, so participants can get it well if they have.
Yeah, of course. I'd probably need to actually double check that. I'm inclined to say it's daily and casual smokers, but I rather than just guessing, I'll make sure that that question is answered properly.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Catherine, for the presentation. Very interesting information. As we all know, international good practice shows that tobacco taxes are the single most important element of effective tobacco control intervention. However, in many countries, excise policy is still facing many challenges related to the tobacco industry attempt to control tobacco sale prices. Professor Aida Ramek-Katak will speak on mechanism of illicit trade control in view of public health. The case of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Professor Aida is medical doctor, specialty of social medicine, health system management and health economics, has Master of Science in Public Health and PhD degree at, in topic of addiction disease and tobacco control. She is the author's major field in public health and health promotion in CDC addiction, a disease with particular focus on tobacco control. At the moment, she is at the position of Assistant Director of Medical Affairs in the Institute of Public Health of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in Sarajevo. And also she is the focal point for tobacco control focal point for collaboration with WHO since 2003. Professor Aida, please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. I will do my best to share screen. I don't know what's going on. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see, should I do... Is it better? Okay.
Yes, it's perfect, Aida.
Okay. As long as I have to fit in some 15 minutes, so I will start immediately. Thank you very much for opportunity to share some experience from one small but very complicated country. We are complicated in everything, including tobacco control. So I'm not sure today I'm gonna bring some good stories or bad stories. I will rather say there are a lot of challenges related to tobacco control. On the beginning, let's remind ourselves what we are speaking today about illicit trade as one of the major economy and global health challenges all over the globe, as long close to 10% of global cigarette, or let's say all tobacco products are still coming from the black market. And thanks to different sources, national one and some other sources, in some countries which are low or middle, we are speaking about even increase almost to the 50% of illegal trade. Among the long list of leading causes of illicit trade, there are so many things, as you could see, but not, of course, high tobacco taxes, which are usually one of the most developed made by tobacco industry. We are speaking about law, we are speaking about weaknesses of transit system, distribution network, cross-border problems, duty-free, lack of resources, and of course, sometimes not very efficient use of effective international collaboration and support. Cigarette prices, all international good practice show us that cigarette prices are still the most main factor, a good factor on tobacco control intervention, and it is not related to the level of the smuggling. There are much more other factors like unlicensed manufacturers and distributions, inefficiency in legislation, public which is usually tolerant to some crime activities. They don't have perception that illicit trade is crime activities, corruption, of course. And we are dealing with very strong lobby of tobacco industry. Particularly, you will see in further of my presentation that Balkan countries become very important area for tobacco industry related to attacking Article 5.3. As I am public health person, I rather to speak about multidimensional intersectorial consequences of illicit trades, because everybody is attacked, everybody is victim by illicit trade of tobacco products. We in public health, because we have to deal with increased accessibility, affordability, and consumption of tobacco, our economies are losing a huge amount of money. And of course, illicit trade is only one part of puzzle of organized crime in society. So what is actually the role? As long as I'm trying to speak about view of health authorities, the role of public health. We are continually struggling to abolish, to eliminate myths which are developed by tobacco industry, and how we are doing this through evidence, of course, through evidence. We are very lucky that we have significant relevant instruments. On the first place, I'm speaking about Framework Convention of Tobacco Control, which was historical, and many others which came later. Of course, from FCTC, we are aware of the fact that Article 15 is very important because of illicit trade protocol, but I want to stress much more attention on the Article 5.3, particularly in these COVID times, where our economies of our countries are attacked very much, and is really challenged to protect public health policies from commercial and other interests of tobacco industry. And this is very much related to the illicit trade of tobacco products. Of course, we are very lucky to use a protocol to eliminate illicit trade in tobacco products in those countries who we are lucky, and to have serious political leadership to ratify those documents could be very helpful to the rest of us who are still struggling how to do that. And not to mention significance of one document, UN Sustainable Development Goals, because this topic is very much related to the at least 4 relevant chapters connected to the health and the quality of life. And in all of them, it was underlying necessity to battle with illicit trade of tobacco products. So when we're speaking about real size of the black market of tobacco products, we have to ask ourselves who is behind it. Because usual myths by tobacco industry is that every single control part of tobacco control policy is leading to the one cause: increasing of smuggling, increasing of black market. And this is the strategy which they don't change wherever they go. Is completely the same all over the globe. We have to remind ourselves that the truth is our own side. And we cannot trust to the tobacco industry data because they are not reliable, and they are not based on any kind of certificate or professional evidence, because they usually have tactics to estimate or to exaggerate the real size of the black market, which is always higher. Some surveys show us that this exaggerament ranking from 17 to over 100%. Usual myths developed by tobacco industry that taxation will reduce government revenue, will destroy jobs and make us more poorer, will increase tobacco smuggling, difficult to monitoring, to implement, and also it is very strong attack to economy of each country. But from other side, our role is to fight with evidence, with proofs, that high tobacco taxes are not associated with a high level of illicit trade. There are so many countries Even you are coming from some countries where are very good examples that high tobacco taxes are not connected with smuggling. They are much more connected with the leadership and how government organize the system of monitoring and inspection services, and also to remind ourselves that we are constantly dealing with myths developed by tobacco industry and their research methodology, what they are used through different kind of institution, agency, individuals who are doing research work for them, which is not scientifically clarified, but they use this kind of publication how to put a pressure to national authorities, which I repeat is a very clear example of violation of Article 5.3 of VCTC. I thought it's useful to mention Project STAR funded by Philip Morris, particularly Philip Morris, who is very much active here in these Balkan countries, and they use sort of regional tactics how to produce some reports which are usually completely lie, and they are not reliable at all in all countries. And for this purpose, I use only example of Poland and Ukraine, where you could see that they are exaggerating the proper size of the illicit trade in those countries, which are completely different when we compare national data sources for those countries. International good practice is something for which we are very familiar. We know that from years that each increase of prices of tobacco products for 10% result with some reducing consumption from 4 to 8%, depending is developed or developing countries. And of course, taxes are the single most important component of effective tobacco control intervention. That's why we are fight for it. So for us in public health, situation is very clear because all our messages, we are based them on evidence base, which doesn't mean that smoking is still increasing cost to the economy and destroying the health of the population. Increasing taxes do not decrease the state budget. Increasing taxes do not increase illicit trade. And of course, it's very useful to follow good example of increasement of taxes of other risk factors for NCD, like alcohol and unhealthy food. What to say more about right level of tobacco taxes? Why we do this? Why we so insist on increasement of tobacco taxes and prices of tobacco products as a very strong tobacco control measures? Because we count of more people will quit, less people will start smoking, and of course those who continue will smoke fewer cigarettes. And all over the globe there are very good examples that it is possible to achieve those goals. Those countries who are very lucky to have political leadership and governance to implement earmarking, they have possibility today to finance health promotion and prevention activities. We are speaking about huge amount of money, which is very important. As long all of us, we are struggling with lack of continual mechanism for financing of health promotion activities. Usual mechanisms for illicit trade control are practically summarized from different kind of relevant documents, and they are very well known. This is strengthening of capacity of tax administration system, increasing control over the supply chain, increasing penalties, good governance of law enforcement, education of public about the real and multidimensional consequences of illicit tobacco market, because everybody is attacked, everybody is victim of increasement of gray market, and of course how to encourage our citizens and provide mechanism to report violators of these laws. In case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, some basic facts. As I said on the beginning, I will share with you national data sources. I have to mention that on the beginning I said we are a very small and complicated country because of the two entities and some health issues which are deal on the national level, or let's say state level. We ratify VCTC among the latest one, for which we are not very proud, but this because this was a result of many obstruction of many kind of different levels of politics and or even including relevant institutions. High smoking prevalence is still high, as you could see, because we are dealing still with relatively cheap price of the tobacco products comparing regional trends. We are not very happy to share with you that thanks to last GITS, we have even increasement of smoking in youth, which is also connected with some stupid decisions done by national finance authorities related to the current prices of tobacco products. And the only good news is that finally, after 10 years of sort of vacuum, we have been able to produce completely new tobacco control law, which was evaluated by WHO, World Bank, and some EU Commission as a very good one, as a very modern one, as a, and very, how to say that, harmonized almost completely with VCTC and AC directive, but unfortunately, as always, good news have one part of the bad news. So bad news is these things, as that this law is sent to the parliament, it is still not adopted for 2 years. We are still waiting for it. What are main challenges? Actually, that until recently, we are very happy that increasement of tobacco taxation and tobacco prices were one of the strongest tobacco control measure in our country until recently. Why I said until recently, you will see very soon. From the public health sector, for us, this was evidence to ask many times through very formal initiative to the state level to implement earmarking initiative. Even in some period we were supported by World Bank office in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Unfortunately, this decision never been accepted so far. Good thing that the domestic industry doesn't exist at all, but from other side, it is replaced by very aggressive and very strong lobby of international tobacco companies who now become owners of our own domestic industry. And you must understand that when I speak about Bosnia and speak about all other countries of ex-Yugoslavia, even larger, this is part of Balkan, which become a very important business area for tobacco industry, as long all of those countries are struggling with the very same situation. No tobacco control law, drafted tobacco control law, but not adopted. So what is the right level of tobacco tax in case of the Bosnia and Herzegovina? Perhaps the most illustrative example is that, as you could see on this slide, for some period of 10 years, we have increasement of average package of cigarettes for 5 times, as long as there were very symbolic changes in average level of salaries. No matter that a formal decision done by public health and our own message was that one higher levels have been achieved, taxes need to continue to increase and to follow recommendation by European Union. Thanks to this, we collected a huge amount of money. Just for you to understand how it looked like and what sort of money I'm speaking about at all, I use some latest statistic that for 10 years we collected almost 6.5 billion convertible mark only from taxes from tobacco products, and related to the share of taxes in the retail price at the moment in Bosnia is in 86. What does it mean? We are very good in this kind of percentage, but we haven't been able to got the money from taxation and excess policy and transfer that money through earmarking to health sector to help in health promotion activities, which make things even more complicated. And it's as a very evident proof that the tobacco industry data are not reliable and scientifically evidence-based is one of the latest publication by Philip Morris. With this publication, all Balkan countries involving Bosnia are covered. And in this publication, they claim that 66% of smokers are buying their cigarettes on gray market, And even 3/4 of them will stop doing that if tobacco prices were reduced. I don't think that any other comment is needed on this point, but fortunately, this consequently was leaded to the sort of paradox of tobacco excise policy in Bosnia and Herzegovina. What I share here with you is very formal data source. I'm speaking about very strange role of indirect taxation authority of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have very strong doubts that this decision is made under the pressure of international tobacco industry, because that what you see now on this slide is a formal part of a very formal report of the same agency, in which they explain their decision about moratorium of the further increase of excise duties on cigarettes. And to explain moratorium means that they made status quo or to change of any kind of taxation policy for next 3 years. To be even more clear, we are not able now to increase tobacco product prices for the next 3 years. I mean, it is very clear. And why? Because they think that any further increasement will jeopardize economy, and which is even more ridiculous, will jeopardize the tobacco industry business's survival. The only thing what is now coming in our own benefit, and we put a lot of hope in the last European Union progress reports for Bosnia and Herzegovina. I must to say that our colleagues in European Union haven't been happy about current situation of tobacco control, because they understood completely situation and the role of national institutions, NGOs, and tobacco industry interference. In Chapter 28, they underline a necessity to ratify protocol for illicit trade. And in Chapter 8, they warn our national authorities that we should continue with increasement of tobacco taxation in next period. So what is the role of government agencies? Mainly Ministry of Health and Public Health Institute. We are doing our jobs in designing national policy strategy and the law. Our role is in public health is, it is sort of, let's say, health diplomacy. We are using and sharing data. We develop very good collaboration with NGOs, and we do on our best to monitoring all different kind of dimensional public health consequences of illicit trades. If you're speaking about at the moment and the current situation, in Bosnia, there is a balance between political and health priorities, but concerning the problem of tobacco control and particularly illicit trade of tobacco product, I have to say that it is more political than health priorities. Why I am saying this, and I'm very aware of fact what I'm saying, that after 2 years of very difficult work, how to produce new law to be harmonized with FICTC and to be evaluated very positive by European Union. We sent this law to the Parliament. For 2 years, this law never showed up on their own agenda, even on Parliament agenda for 2 years. I think this is just enough for you to understand under what kind of pressure those people are. We have strong lobby of tobacco industry, even on top. In 2020, we have COVID years, we have attacked economy by COVID, we have a pre-election and election period in which all of us know that no parliamentarian member or any kind of minister will do anything but wise decisions related to tobacco control. So to conclude on my last slide, that actually I hope you understand the general idea of what I wanted to share with you today, that it is not typical presentation only on the problem of illicit trade of tobacco. Today I was speaking about a story of illicit trade, which is very much connected. That this is actually a story how in some countries tobacco industry is attacking Article 5.3 of FICTC. And this is a story which is now happening in Bosnia, but tomorrow could be happening in all other countries, because we are passing a very sensitive period of our economies attacked by COVID. and people from tobacco industry are just eager to help and to recover their social image. I think in this COVID time, economic crisis, this behavior of tobacco industry will be more stronger and more manipulative. So that's the reason why we should stay together. And I'm finishing with the sentence that this was our experience in Bosnia and our struggle through legislation, collaboration, building capacity and fight for listening of proofs and evidence, but also lecture how much is important to share international experience and support. So thank you very much for your time and patience.
Thank you very much, Aida. Now we'll go to the next presentation, the role your own cigarettes release more toxins in smoking machines and is more harmful than industrial cigarettes. And it's become more popular in Europe and even in other regions. Until 1991, roll your own cigarettes concerned only 3% of the market of industrial cigarettes. Professor Bertrand Totzenberg will speak on reduction of price difference between all roll your own tobacco and cigarettes is associated with a decrease in the fraction of smoked roll your own tobacco in France since 2016. Professor Bertrand is a professor in chest medicine in Petit Salpêtrière Hospital, University Hospital in Paris, and in Assistance Public Hospital de Paris and UPMC Paris Sorbonne University. He is former president of Office French Tobacco Prevention, president of Paris Sans Tabac, and vice president of RISPAD, French Hospital Addiction Network, and board member of French Anti-Tobacco Alliance. He had 2 expert conferences on tobacco control and 2 reports for French government on passive smoking and e-cigarettes. And he had heads the French AFNOR. Please, Professor, we would start your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, but I don't see anymore my the link. I see yours. Okay. This is here. I put my presentation in here, but I cannot activate anymore. Yes. How I can do? It's
Professor Dautzenberg,
yeah.
If you want, I can run your presentation, but you'll have to tell me next slide when I should switch.
Okay, I try again.
Mm-hmm.
But you can try also, because this is in pause, but I cannot activate. I push the button, but it don't work. Did you see it? No, you don't see anything. So please present my presentation. You see the presentation? No?
Just a second, I'm sharing.
I see.
Okay.
Okay, you can increase the size.
Do you see it now?
Okay, it's okay. So my speech is not on the illicit trade. I am Professor Bertrand Totzenberg, and I'm not so fluent English by the previous speaker, but it's not, I can be understand. So I make a parallel between the price of roll your own cigarette and regular cigarette, because there is a clear link between the two, and the price change consumption in France. I have no conflict of interest on the topics. This is the sale of roll your own cigarette here. It's very, very important before 1944. And the cigarette become more important by thin cut cigarette until 1944, and the increase dramatically increased. Then there is a decrease of roll your own cigarette, And from some years, there is a small increase of thin cut tobacco when the cigarette decrease. Next slide. Next one. Okay. If you look before 2003, because I have specific data after, you see there is when you decrease cigarette sales, you increase all your own cigarettes. Next slide. So in January 2004, at the beginning of my speech, it's very clear that thin cut tobacco is more dangerous than tobacco. And they represent at this time only 3% of the market, so we don't take good attention of this product. And in 1991, you have the first French law on tobacco, and there is an increase of 3% to 70% in 12 years, with an increase of price of cigarette, but a very, very small increase of price of thin cut tobacco. So it's a mistake to don't increase both price in the same time. So at the end of 2003, it's €5 to buy 20 cigarettes. It's €2.52 to buy 20 tobacco to have 20 cigarettes. If you use 750 milligrams of tobacco by cigarette, but if you use 0.4 grams of tobacco by cigarette, it's only 1.34. Next one. Next slide. So we look, the data, this data is available online of OFDT and Douane Française. It's two sources, but it's the same database. You can see all the market of French tobacco if you have interest to have them. Next slide. So one of the problem is the weight of tobacco, because in the past, industrial cigarettes contain 1 gram of tobacco, but now industrial cigarettes contain 0.7 to 0.8 gram of tobacco only, and sometimes more, because they use extended tobacco. Expanded tobacco is impregnated with a highly vaporizable liquid, and we have brutal heat, and with a CO2 or liquid nitrogen or also water. And the water removes a part of the cellular of tobacco, and they increase the size of tobacco. So now there is, you cannot see very well on this. Hello? It's okay? So you can see very well this slide, but it's a ISO norm to measure ISO 15592 to have a standard roll your own cigarette. And there is two kinds of cigarettes, A and B. One is a cigarette of 5 millimeter and 700 milligram of tobacco. And sorry, it's 400 milligram of tobacco and 5 millimeter, and the other is 750 milligram of tobacco and 7 millimeter. And if you use this tobacco, if you build the cigarette as recommended by the ISO standard, and you put in the smoking machine as recommended by the ISO standard for smoking machine, you can see them. You provide more than 10 milligram, 17, 15 milligram of, no, stay on the slide, please. 50 milligram of tar, and more than 1 milligram of nicotine, and more than 10 milligram of carbon monoxide. So clearly, the roll your own tobacco market in Europe is market to build illegal cigarette to be sold in Europe. And I sent a letter 20 years ago when they appeared on French cigarette pack on the Ministry of Health and in Brussels. And the answer, they have no answer when tobacco companies suppress the result of the data. But now, roll your own tobacco is, for me, illegal in Europe, because if you use it as recommended by the owner, you build illegal cigarette. So for the study, you study the cigarette with 750, 100 milligram of tobacco, and then 400 milligram of tobacco. In France now, most of users use 400 milligram of tobacco, sometimes with some cannabis inside, but next slide. Next. So there is a progressive increase of tobacco price in France. And there is a small increase in roll-your-own tobacco as you can see here, is a political decision to increase 15% of the tax of roll-your-own tobacco. Next slide. This decision is taken by Michel Delaunay, the former president of Alliance contre le tabac. We obtained this increase at the French Parliament in 2017. Next slide. Next. And as you can see, if you look the industrial cigarette and roll-your-own cigarette, 1 gram of tobacco, thin-cut tobacco, you see the difference decrease. But the mistake, and they look, he say 1 cigarette equal 1 gram of roll-your-own tobacco. It's not true at all. Next slide. If you, previous slide. Previous, yes. If you look what happened with cigarette, the price of 1 cigarette and the price of 1 gram of thin-cut tobacco, 750 gram and 400 gram, you see there is a huge difference between the two prices. And the reality in France is more of smokers use 0.4 gram. So roll-your-own tobacco remain much more less costly than regular cigarette. Next slide. Next slide. So after the decision to increase the tax of roll-your-own tobacco, there is a difference. If you see, there is the consumption of cigarette and consumption of roll-your-own. There is an increase of roll-your-own and a decrease of cigarette. Now we have in France a much increase of tax, and we have a decrease of cigarette and a decrease of roll-your-own. The percentage of decrease remains the same. Next slide. Is the same with 1 gram, 0.7. Next slide. So the problem is how to compare both products, and one industrial cigarette, 1 gram of roll-your-own cigarette. Industrial cigarette is 0.750 gram, and industrial cigarette with, if you compare with 0.4 gram. So you can see the same for industrial cigarette, and if you use the 755, you have a huge difference between both prices. Next slide. So the difference of price between roll-your-own, you have an increase. There is a dramatic decrease, but now after 2 years, from 2016 and 2008, there is a difference. But now we are start to increase again because we don't increase enough the tax of thin-cut tobacco. Next slide. So decrease the difference price. So if you look what happened at the beginning in 1991, in red is only very, very few roll-your-own tobacco. There is an increase until 2016, a decrease until 2018, but now they increase again because we don't take. So we have the differential of tax increase, the differential of tax decrease, and the differential of tax increase if you compare cigarette to 750, 100 milligram of tobacco. Next slide. So in conclusion, reducing the price differential between industrial cigarette and roll-your-own tobacco is effective to decrease roll-your-own cigarette use. Allowing the price difference to stagnate increase the use of roll-your-own tobacco. 15 gram of thin-cut tobacco to build 20 large REO cigarettes should be sold at the same price as a pack of 20 industrial cigarettes in all European countries. This is especially true as many smokers use only 0.5 gram of thin-cut tobacco if in a roll-your-own cigarette. Thank you very much, and sorry for my English.
Thank you, dear Professor. Now we'll go to the next and the last presentation. The lockdown measures during the COVID-19 pandemic distorted the international trade. EU retailers benefited from short-term blocks to elicit cross-border movements, but national measures elsewhere had an expected side effect, creating new opportunities for tax fraud. The crisis highlights the impact of the parallel trade on essential public health policies that depend on taxes to reduce smoking incidence. Secure tax stamps have proven their worth in protecting tax revenues and combating fraud. Ms. Christine McQueen will speak on quarantining illicit trade, tobacco control through the lens of COVID-19. Ms. Christine, an economist by training, Christine served as a British diplomat for nearly 30 years before joining SICPA in 2011 as Director of Corporate Affairs. In this role, she and her team have worked on a number of projects to combat fraud in the tobacco sector, supporting the company's technical developers and undertaking studies to assess the impact of technology in improving excess tax programs. Christine has been director of the International Tax Stamp Association since it was set up in 2015. Ms. Christine, please start your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Hani. And just a very quick word on this first slide about the International Tax Stamp Association, which if I just describe quickly, because I know there's a lot of slides and time is running on, brings together the independent providers of technical control systems, tax stamps, but actually quite a lot more in the field of traceability. So let's think about that of technological solutions which can help tax control. And independent, I mean, of course, completely independent of the tobacco industry. And it's in that dichotomy between the industry trying to fulfill the requirements of the WHO bits of legislation that in fact it's had its origin, I think, very much as a representation of implementing the spirit as well as the letter of those bits. So perhaps just also following on from what's been said before, there's been quite a lot about tax as the best way of increasing price being the best mechanism for reducing smoking incidents. What counters that is fraud, and what we as a group of providers are interested in doing is fighting that fraud. So if I could say, whatever one believes and sees in evidence in different countries about how taxes are undermined or what impact, it is possible through good control measures to shift the curve to the right. So, you know, clearly the tobacco industry says tax will have negative impacts for governments. They suggest that, and we would contest very strongly that if you put the right control measures in place with technology supporting them, as long as a very long list of other important things, then you can counter it. So it's all possible. So perhaps we can just quickly move to the first proper slide. What is a tax stamp? I think many of you know, not all countries have them. In the UK, of course, we haven't had any sort of tax stamp until recently. In fact, we still don't have a tax stamp. We have a security label. But you know, a tax stamp is something which can be highly secure. It's a label or a mark. It doesn't actually have to be a label, but generally it is. It's better if it is, and it allows government to know that tax has been paid. If we go to the next slide, before I get on to, I'll talk a bit more about tax stamp, but just, you know, if you have the advantages of a well-designed tax stamp and traceability program and the different elements, is that they can very effectively deter different sorts of tax fraud. They can obviously have effect on different qualities of products. They can create a level playing field for compliant manufacturers. I think that's relevant in the sense that, you know, good laws are followed by some manufacturers and not by others. Although we'd like to reduce smoking incidents completely, at least those that follow the laws are easier to control. Obviously this year we've seen a lot of different phenomena. We've seen, you know, economies very stretched, needing money, leaving them very vulnerable, particularly in developing countries, and with increasing health needs. So at you know, this moment more than other, it's really important for governments to have effective tax control systems. The national lockdowns have had some very weird and wonderful effects, I think, on illicit trade. And I've seen there's quite a lot of questions about the pattern of frauds and lots of different factors. But I just give two examples of those sort of unexpected secondary impacts. One, for example, in South Africa, where smoking was banned, or cigarettes sales were banned. Sound like a great thing. The reality is that in the absence of other controls, that's not what happened. People kept on smoking, but they were pushed into the illicit market. So that gave a real boost to the illicit market of cigarettes. So no tax, all sorts of weird and wonderful producers, a great opportunity. So definitely not the objective, but a very negative impact. Another completely different example, I think we can see in Europe. There's been quite a lot of work done in France about cross-border sales. So because of the different tax patterns in Europe, and there won't be harmonization anytime soon, there is a lot of cross-border purchasing. Consumers go across the border from France to Belgium, where tax rates are lower, and buy product. When lockdown happened, that wasn't possible. And I think there's some interesting statistics which show how sales increased. What that illustrated was a whole set of illicit trade activities which were made much more transparent, and some of that legal and unfortunate, so legally going across borders. But of course, we know there is a lot more of that goes on. People do not respect the legal limits for those cross-border purchases. Those undermine the impact of all the tax control policies. And of course, they're very, very much known to the manufacturers that do not therefore respect the principles of delivering the quantities of product to a market which is commensurate to local consumption. So I think interesting things coming out of this year at a time when we know we need to do this stuff ever better. Next slide. And there are just two slides coming up, which I'll go through very quickly. Is that, you know, a control program has lots of different components. We've obviously got tax collection. We can support that through track and trace. We can support that through product authentication measures such as security on a tax stamp, but none of those elements on their own are enough. If we go to the next slide, where we're talking about products where tax is as much as a very significant banknote, £5, £6, £7, £8, £9. There is a lot of tax on a pack of cigarettes. We should really be protecting that in a high security way, in the way we protect a banknote, and that's what good, well-designed tax stamp and control systems do. They have multiple layers of security in there, which speak to different parts of the audience. So digital and material bits of security are what you need to do to actually be effective. Move to the next slide. So I would say that tax stamps are great. I'm representing an association of producers, so I think it's important to remember that actually a lot of work has been done on what works, what doesn't work, and the World Bank makes a lot of recommendations, some of which have come up in the other presentations, and I just highlight those two, that if you want to have controls, tax stamps are the best way. That's well-designed, highly secure tax stamps, not just any old tax stamp, and also properly designed track and trace systems. Of course, the World Bank has done a lot of reports which are very evidence-based, which illustrate the impacts and make recommendations on how to get this sort of thing right. Next slide. I won't dwell on this. You're all very familiar with the bits of legislation, but I will just highlight Article 8 of the protocol, which sets out the framework for a tracking and tracing system as a key tool for fighting illicit trade. It's well drafted, but of course what you draft on paper in terms of principles is never quite so easy to make happen in practice, when you've got those that are trying to undermine it, when you've got technology evolving very fast, when also you have, for example, WHO, a lack of resource to make it happen. And one of the pieces of work that as an association we've been doing is trying to understand that and translate that into something which really works, and works in different countries in different ways, because the sort of systems you might find acceptable in a developed country with sophisticated mechanisms, other means of making trusts. For example, in the EU, we won't talk about it today, but we have serious misgivings about the system in the EU, even in the EU, but I can be absolutely confident those sorts of systems do not work in the developing world, where there is much scope for problems to fall between the cracks of modules. And the EU has a very modular system rather than one end-to-end, which is what I think the spirit of Article 8 was about, and which certainly we have thoughts on how you can make it happen. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we've done quite a lot of work on how do you translate this stuff into reality. You're not going to read the bit on the left of the slide. There is a report which makes very clear recommendations. I'm going to touch on a couple of them in a moment, but the full report can be read on our website. And as I say, it's a blueprint for how do you make these very important recommendations, how do you make them real in practice with all the technical complexities there are on the ground and the different environments. Next slide. So there are actually more recommendations in our report than this, but here there are a list of some of the most important. I'm going to touch on, I think, 3 and 4 of them in a little bit more detail, but these are all aspects that you have to get right. And I'm conscious in the discussions that I've seen over the years that sometimes people in the health community find some of this a bit complicated. There are lots of levels of technology. What often happens is therefore the responsibility is handed over to tax officials, and the tax officials don't necessarily have the same objective, and the key is to be able to marry those together. Even in tax authorities, there is often a very mixed and limited understanding of the technical complexities. I should add that members of the association have been involved for a number of years in trying to make these systems work on the ground. Some of the systems are described in the World Bank report, but there is a level of complexity which sometimes people get very bored with or get lost on, but if you don't get that right, you will end up having systems that don't work. And this is ever more the case as we move to data-driven systems, to artificial intelligence. If you design your system wrong, you put rubbish in, you'll get rubbish out at the other end. We're all working in regulatory frameworks which are quite complicated. We have to remember that those who seek to undermine them do not work in the same regulatory frameworks, and they're always finding shortcuts and creative, innovative ways to commit fraud that it's sometimes difficult to anticipate. If we move to the next slide, this just, those are the 5 areas I'm going to touch on. We'll go to the next slide on the first of them, which is the tax stamp as the bearer of a unique identifier. So unique identifier is core to the provisions of Article 8 of the protocol. On the right, you've got, this is an Ecuadorian tax stamp. You see some of the features, you can't see them all in their glory. There are some very, very visible features that can be seen by consumers, and there are different layers of security that are usable in different ways by all the different actors. There are some semi-visible features which can be used for distributors. There are some that are invisible and can be used by enforcement agencies, and those both within the cryptographically protected codes, but also in terms of invisible marks. And I think it's just important that, you know, if you can see it, you can try to copy it. You may not copy it very well, but you can try. If it's invisible, you can't. So from a security point of view, and this is linked very much also to well-established banknote security, you can get much, much better controls. Those are obviously require sometimes special equipment, but this is available to enforcement authorities. So I just come back to sort of, you know, where does this fit into the overall system? If we have good, up-to-date technologies, we can make what is often very scarce enforcement resource much more effective. Enforcers are effective, then it creates barriers and incentives to wanting to commit this sort of fraud. And many criminal organizations or terrorist organizations, they find their money where it's easiest. Traditionally, it has been terribly, terribly easy to make money out of tobacco fraud. And there have been, the penal consequences of being caught are often very, very slight compared to other crimes. So that has made it attractive. But the means to counter that is all there. Just add, so, you know, different features for different players along the supply chain so that they can contribute and participate in controlling. Separately, worth underlining, because there's always manufacturers' resistance, that manufacturers are very, very used to putting these sort of products on their on their products. They're already equipped. There is absolutely no reason why it shouldn't happen. It's absolutely minimally invasive and cause them no extra costs. Next slide. Very quickly, I touched on data. Data ever more important. Data especially important when we're talking about cross-border transfers, and you know, that is what the tobacco fraud has flourished on the basis, with some very, very complex operations carried out by tobacco manufacturers, often themselves, and also criminal organizations that skip between countries. They fall between different sources of data. It's not interlinked. That's why, of course, end-to-end supply chain approaches are very important. The databases you have in reality are necessarily going to be national. It's just not going to happen any other way. They need to be compatible. They need to be linked up. Linking them up is, of course, the objective of the global information sharing focal point, which is foreseen to be overseen by the WHO in Article 8, and which much work is still required, partly because WHO doesn't have its own money to do this. It's reliant on others, and because data standards are changing, technology is changing. This is a really, really important open point which needs to be resolved by the meeting of the parties if the system is to work at all. So next slide. I just mentioned there are ISO standards in this, as in many other areas. ITSA worked very hard on the ISO 15459, which defines the sorts of things that have to be on a tax standard. Next slide. This is not production monitoring. This is not so clearly set out in the legislation, but I just want to emphasize it because experience on the ground has demonstrated just how important this is. So production monitoring is just that. It is monitoring online what is being produced by the manufacturers. It can sound fanciful to think of the scale of cheating that can go on. We're all familiar with the third shift idea. I can tell you it really, really does happen. You can have 2 shifts of a factory which are declared to the tax authorities, and another one at night which is not declared. production monitoring aims to stop that. And where we've seen effective production monitoring schemes put on, which essentially is about not allowing the production lines to operate unless what they're being produced is counted, and that means quality of product, because there are, you know, some products which are subject to lower taxes and higher. So those controls on the machine can result in overnight massive increases in production declarations, which shows massive levels of cheating. In a number of countries where these schemes have been put in, obviously the enforcement agencies end up either having a massive increase in taxes or controls, or in fact they just close down some of these manufacturing sites. So really important to control this sort of illegal production, because what happens when you produce the third shift is you have this really cheap product which can go on the market, which looks, if you don't have a high quality taxam, it looks just the same as the legal product. So virtually impossible for enforcement agencies to counter. So this can have really important, very quick impact if you get it right. Next slide. I think we're coming to the end. Some of this has been said before, but I think it always bears repeating. The protocol makes it clear that interaction with the tobacco industry should be to the extent strictly necessary. This is sometimes counterintuitive for some of the control agencies, because traditionally they work quite closely with the tobacco industry. And I think they often need to be reminded that the interests of the industry the Article 8 is very clear and very good in its intentions, but sometimes even good intentions are difficult to work on the ground. And one of the pieces of work by the association has to be think through very clinically, very carefully, what it is that the industry, the tobacco industry, may be permitted to do to make these control systems work. And I can tell you the list is much shorter than that we see in the EU control system. But there are some things which maybe by definition they have to do. But if we clearly delimit them, we can control them. So for example, tax stamps do need to be applied in manufacturing facilities. They have to be done by the tobacco industry, but they can be controlled. So the production monitoring is a way of controlling how they do it. Likewise, some of the communications about the logistics data and shipments, which is important for supply control, they probably have to have a role, but we have to control it. There are certain things which they absolutely must never do. So for example, proposing the security features that would protect a pack. This is an invitation to the tobacco industry to choose things which meet their interests, which may not be high security, but may actually serve more for brand protection than their purposes. We've seen some of that in the EU. We should not let them manage the data either. Data is, they say, the new gold. If we're going to move, as we will to the future, to much more data-driven systems, you have to be sure you have control of it, that it's independent, that it's not rubbish in, rubbish out, and that can't be manipulated. And as the last point, production monitoring, it sort of goes without saying, doesn't it? But reality is often otherwise. You know, if you're trying to control someone, you can't let them control themselves. If you need to control and monitor their production, that needs to be done by the government itself, or a party that is trusted by the government to do it, that is not the industry. So that's my last point. Thank you very much. There's lots and lots of data. I know this is sometimes, I've tried not to make it too technical. We could have a very deeply technical discussion if you'd like. I saw some very interesting questions that are coming up on the chat. Of course, we're trying to do a lot of data-driven analysis of the impacts of these control systems. I think there was a question about whether tax systems were effective in the cost way. I can say there is no doubt from the data that they are, as long as you do it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Now we will come to questions. We received a few questions from our participants. First questions event came by email before the event, before the webinar, from Kamar Iqbal. The question is, there is any best practice model to control illicit tobacco trade in low and middle income countries as in high income countries? The question is for all panelists who would like to answer.
Perhaps I'll just say a word because I touched on this before. I think it is quite clear that the tobacco industry is much more powerful in developing countries in all sorts of ways. And I think this is where the application of Article 8 needs to be done absolutely to the letter. Perhaps, and it's a contentious point, in developed countries, you can have relationships where you can allow the tobacco industry to do a bit more. Perhaps, I think it's contentious. You cannot in developing countries. I think evidence time after time suggests that you give them an inch, they will take a mile. It just doesn't work. And I see some other questions in South Africa. South Africa has put forward lots of proposals to control. Somehow it never makes it through Parliament. Somehow the tender, as was recently earlier this year, is withdrawn before anybody is appointed. They are very powerful. So I think developing countries need special controls.
Thank you. Okay, any other panelists would like to answer, or we all agree on this?
All I would say is always to come back to the point where, price is key on this. And, in order to save lives, reduce prevalence, UK have got high rates of taxation. We really need to support developing countries to make sure they've got all of the infrastructure in place, really to protect their populations. So it's really important.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move to second question from Dmitry Yanin, directly to Catherine. Do you have a data about sources, countries of the illicit cigarettes?
So, this is something that we try and keep across as much as possible. And I guess a key source of data for us is what our enforcement partners are finding on the ground. Sources will vary, supply routes will change regularly. And I do think it's something that we need to keep across. Other researchers will, I'm sure, have access to much better data. But for us, it's about kind of knowing what's available. Just the other day, we know that some products were found that were manufactured in Ukraine and found its way over to the northeast. So it's something that we really need to keep monitoring and to keep tracking.
Okay, thank you. Third question from Dr. Jawad. Do you do surveys annually to estimate illicit trade? And what questions do you ask? It's directed to all panelists. Please, if you have any answers on this.
Shall I? Obviously, so as I mentioned in the presentation, so the Northeast does undertake a survey every other year and have done since 2009, and that's really important for us as one measure of the illicit trade. So, and yes, we ask smokers and non-smokers for their opinions on the illicit trade and in terms of their comfort levels with it, whether they're aware of the issues, whether they're likely to report. In terms of asking smokers whether they buy illicit tobacco, so yes, we do ask that question, but we ask it in a way that they provide as informed a response as possible. So we outline what the definition of illicit tobacco is. So the kind of the three main categories around non-duty paid or illicit whites or counterfeit. We ask then whether they've bought any of those products, where they buy it from. So it's really an in-depth study, which is really, really valuable for us to kind of inform our policy making and planning.
Of course, we have many questions on the surveys or on the data of illicit trade, because all the world, all regions, we are suffering from lack of information or of enough information on the level of illicit trade and country level or on regional level, even international. So that most people, they are interested about the data or about the surveys that could be made.
Yeah, I was just, I don't know, Catherine, if this is one of your questions, but on certainly on one survey I've seen, which, you know, has been trying to counter the tobacco industry stats based on empty packs and things like that, was the price point. Because illicit tobacco is nearly always cheaper, even if people don't want to accept that they're buying illicit product. If you can get them to give you an honest answer on the price, you get quite an interesting indicator as well, I think.
It's true, and yeah, we do ask because, like you say, that is really important. And yes, historically, it's around half the price of shop bought tobacco. I mean, obviously, data in the Northeast also then supplements the really robust data that is collected nationally in the UK by our customs department. And I'll also flag there's a really good toolkit available internationally that the tobacconomics team have put together around measuring the illicit trade. And I know there's some really useful resources in there also.
Okay, thank you. Next question to Professor Aida from Dr. Pierre. Does illicit tobacco trade always associated to other illicit trades as drugs, weapons, men, women, or human traffics? An evaluation of the links with mafias?
If I understand well, I'm not sure about some current data on that kind of questions. You know, I have to evaluate some possible sources, but I'm not sure that we have available data about connection with other crime activities. So far, we have national data, usually by police, by customary, and some actions of agency for indirect taxation. Usually, they are very dramatic, popular, even on the television, how much illegal packs of cigarettes they just discover or whatsoever. You know, it's very popular to see on the television. But unfortunately, we don't have a proper data sources about real dimension of it, because different kind of stakeholders are involved in it, and particularly tobacco industry.
Yeah. I think there are all sorts of anecdotal information. I mean, it is a bit dated, but for example, the IRA had very significant tobacco smuggling operations because it was such an easy way to make money.
Yeah.
I'll just flag that links to organised crime is one of our key messages in our communications. You know, different people are motivated by different things. I mean, lots of people are motivated by the fact that illicit gets kids hooked. But in terms of links to crime, we think that's really important to make sure that message is understood. And that's why it's really important that this isn't a health issue, it's an enforcement issue as well. So, you know, we're in touch with, you know, the police, our enforcement colleagues and others to make sure that the reality is brought to life. You know, it's not a victimless crime. People are, you know, are the victims in this.
If I could add one thing, I think the medias have also a very important role in developing a perception of people about the real dimension of the problem. You know, when you listen to medias, and there is another problem which is maybe not directly connected to illicit trade, but it is in sort of media appearance. Increasing number of migrants, what we have now in this part of Balkan. You know, people who are coming here, they are very aware of the fact they cannot stay, they don't want to go back to their own origin countries. So you see, we still don't have systematic solution for this problem. But every day in the newspaper, you will find some article about some crime activities of those people, which are building very unhuman unpopularity in domestic population. But when we recently done some analysis about total number of crime activities and the crime activities in which migrants were involved, it was very small proportion. which that how is possible, you know, to create wrong impression of the people about the level of the crime activities in certain area.
Thank you.
Just as an example.
Thank you, Ada. Thank you for all. The last question is from the Professor Bertrand, directed to Catherine. In France, illicit trade is much lower than transporter tobacco market, a legal market. What is the part of transporter market and illicit trade in UK?
And I think for this question, I will have to go back and have a look at customs data. So they do collect this on an annual basis, and I can send the link through so that Professor can get that answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So now we are coming to the end of our very interesting session, and I would like to thank you, all of you, for giving us part of your valuable time, and for attendees also for their showing interest in attending and in asking questions. I'm encouraging you to attend also our following webinars will be held in the near future. We will send, of course, invitations, and it's again as a part of INSPE conference. So thank you all, and thanks to Paulina for her support on organizing and helping organizing all this and her effort. And thank you so much for all what you have done during this webinar. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.